Hey guys, welcome back to the GM's table. Before we get started, we'll remind everybody like, share, subscribe. You know the rest. Patreon link down below. Videos early. Blah blah blah. All right, we're going into another D&D review. This is technically my second recording of this, and I'm just gonna put it right up front. I'm probably gonna mispronounce Mordenkainen's a lot. I tend to just say Mordenkainen. I don't know why, but we're doing Mordenkainen's Tome foes. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, whether I think it's worth the money, and a little bit of where I think it ranks in the books. Not like a full ranking, but kind of my placing in it. So, the quick and dirty, if you only got a couple minutes to watch this, I enjoy this book, but it is probably the second weakest book for 5th edition that's come out. The only thing I'd say is weaker is the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. You can compare this a lot to Volo's, but honestly, at the $30 price tag, unless you enjoy a coffee table book, which is totally fine if you do, but unless you enjoy a coffee table book, or you're okay with kind of half of a monster manual for 30 bucks, at least in size, I'd say this is more of a $20 book. So if this goes on sale, if you can find this a little discounted, great. If not, we're going to get into it. I don't hate this book. I actually really like it. I just don't think it's a $30 product. So, first and foremost, if you're a player, there's not a ton in here for you other than lore. There is some stuff. Something just went in my eye. There is some stuff here, but there's not a ton. I know 5th edition's kind of goal this time around is every book is going to have player material and GM material, which is kind of a brilliant thing. It means everybody can get use out of any of the books. And it means everybody will want all the books in an ideal world. In all reality, this is a GM book. There's a bit of player stuff, but this is really a GM book. So, that aside, what do we have? Well, first, it talks about the Blood War, and it talks about devils and demons, and really cool, really useful stuff for GMs. And when I get into talking about the GM stuff, we'll cover that. Also in the Blood War section, they go into Tieflings, and this is where the player's stuff starts to come in. Because in the Tiefling section, we get actually a good bit of new sub-races for Tieflings. Funny to compare it to Sword Coast, because Sword Coast had you could swap out your Tiefling sub-race stuff, or the Tiefling stuff, a couple of them, to kind of have this grab bag of things to pick and choose and build your own Tiefling. This, I didn't go in and fully check, but I feel like they took a lot of that and some custom stuff, definitely added flavor text, and they made packages. There's Tieflings based on what fiend you descend from, or what type of fiend you descend from. And I really like that. I always enjoy that for Tieflings. I like Tieflings to feel like they're connected to which specific one they're descended from, because Tiefling is actually a very, very broad race in a lot of ways. Moving on from that, we then cover elves, dwarves, halflings, and gnomes. That's 4 of the core race. Really, if you strip out gnomes, which they kind of did, halflings and gnomes is actually one section. It's your core D&D races minus human. They don't really cover humans, and that's fine. This is about the weirder stuff and the stuff you're not always expecting. It's Mordenkainen. It's Tome foes. We're going to be going into extra planner stuff. That's why we talked about devils and demons. Fine. So, elves. You get a lot of lore for elves. And it's really interesting. The lore for each of the races is really interesting. Like I said, if you're cool with a coffee table book full of lore about very common D&D races and beautiful art, awesome. The first half of this book is basically that. Now, from the actual mechanic side and what do players get? Well, you get the Eladrin, and I'd say they're expanded on from the Aladdin in the DMG. And you get sea elves, and you get some new elf sub races. Cool. Every race also has some tables that help you fill out the fluff and can give you extra flavor. I love those tables from a personal standpoint, but if you're going in looking for actual value, I don't think those tables are actually a ton of value. They're interesting, and I lump them again in the coffee table thing. They're fluff. They're interesting things. Not everybody buys these books for that. The actual crunch, you get a couple sub-races. Moving on to dwarves. Again, lots of fluff, lots of lore, and interesting things about dwarves, but the actual crunch, you get the Dwegar. That's it. You get the Dwegar. I do enjoy that they talk about the differences of dwarves and Dwegars. Just like back in the elves, I love there's a little thing where they actually talk about elves and drow will work together sometimes and how that works out. So there's interesting things, but as far as what actually comes to the table, especially if you do homebrew games, it's a mixed bag depending on what you want to grab and take. Then we have halflings and gnomes. They're one section. I honestly feel like they lumped gnomes in with halflings because halflings are of the core three races other than humans. Gnomes aren't. Gnomes are one of the rarer races in the player's handbook. But halflings don't get anything. They don't. We get some lore, and I do like they talk about that. What's the actual difference between a halfling and a gnome and stuff? You know, fluff, lore, crunch, nothing for halflings. Gnomes, you get the deep gnome. If you've noticed, we've gotten the deep gnome before. I believe we've gotten the Dwegar before. What's going on? Well, we're going to get into that, especially when we get the Monster Manual of 5e and how they like to do reprinting and why and how they're getting away with it. But that's really it. You're done with the player side of things. Period. That's it. You're looking at a handful of sub-races and a bunch of lore. This is a lore book for players, which any DM book can be a lore book in the hands of a player, because all D&D books tend to have lore, but this is a very lore-heavy book. Now, going back to the front half of this book, for DMs, if you're looking to do a campaign that features heavily in the Abyss or the Nine Hells, I'll actually say this is a pretty useful book. It goes into a lot of detail of the difference between devils and demons, which I love. Devils get cults, and there's bonuses, cult members, and depending on the cult, some cults are about like lone killers. Some are, they have members and they have leaders, and every one of the main devils has their own cult with bonuses you give to followers, bonuses you give to leaders, which typically get the follower stuff too. All of that. They go into a bit more about Cambions, which is actually a monster I very much enjoy, and why sometimes Cambions will come out differently. I love this. There's this concept in here that because devils have cults, sometimes the cult uses magic to take the power of the cult leader and put it back into an infant, and that creates a different kind of Cambion. I enjoy that. Demons, however, I think are even cooler, because if you're looking to run an evil campaign or a hell-based campaign, demons, for each of the demon lords, there's different demonic boons. Yeah, we have new boons, and they're specifically demonic. I kind of love that. It's how demons can like put their power into enemies. Both the cults and the boons are great ways to take like standard NPCs or standard enemies and bump them up as well, and to make them tied to a bigger bad. But demonic boons, I really enjoy the concept of, and how they are in there. They're very simple. Typically, they're one, maybe two, like little text boxes, just like you'd have in a monster manual, because monster abilities tend to be much shorter and cleaner and very to the point. And sometimes attribute bonuses. That's it. That's all the boons are, and you get to pick one of the boons they give. But by lumping it, you can help keep things thematic. I do enjoy that. Looking at my notes, I did forget one thing for players, so I'm gonna rewind a bit. There is one new, we're gonna put in heavy quotes, new, one new entire race as well, because it's not in the core ones, but it is there. The Gith are in this book, both the Githyanki and the Githzerai. I'm gonna be real honest, I'm gonna mispronounce the different types of Gith. I completely forgot about it, because it's like 4 or 5 pages. All of the actual race stuff for both of them is on 2 pages, which is fine. That's how 5th is written. But if you're not looking for it, you can miss it. I'm not a huge fan of the Gith, mostly because my players don't tend to want to play them, so they don't feature often. Sometimes I'll have a Gith as a villain, because they can be really fun villains. But the Gith are here. I feel bad that I totally went over that. There is one completely new race. I don't think a $30 book is worth a race. But there's that. So that's the front half of the book. The back half of the book is a monster manual, plain and simple. The thing is, I never looked at Volo's guide as just a monster manual because of how the front half of the book went. Volo's guide stayed like on the monster path the whole book. It felt very uniform in that. And the front half was, let's look at the super iconic monsters that kind of pop up everywhere: orcs, goblins, mind flayers. And then we do deep delves. In Mordenkaisen's, it's kind of the exact same thing, but they're deep delving the races you were already playing as. I think that's kind of a mixed bag because typically GMs already have good ideas about that. Now, if you want it, and again, if you want a lore book, if you want to know what Wizards of the Coast's deep delve into a race is, and you want that to flesh it out, great. But let's be honest, a lot of GMs already have a notion of that, and at least enough for it to run. Looking at a deep delve of how mind flayers reproduce actually adds something very new to the outlook of the game if you haven't read that before. Looking at how elves act when they're old, it's interesting. And it may come up in a story point, but it's not something that an entire campaign can hinge on, like the mind flayers and their pools with the tadpoles. I'm blanking on the name of that you put in the eye and turns people into mind flayers. So there is that. Mordenkaisen's kind of a mirror of Volo's in a lot of ways, but it's not as focused. Because Mordenkainen goes, we're in hell. Now we're looking at the core races. Now we're looking at monsters that go from a whole spread. Volo's was, the monsters go a spread, but it was themed monsters the whole way. The races they had were pretty much the monstrous races, both civilized and uncivilized, because even the civilized races were all kind of monstrous. But, that said, the monsters in the Monster Manual side are awesome. There's a whole section on clockwork creatures that I love because I have a soft spot for clockwork. But there's a fairly large spread. I'm talking 10 plus pages that I need to bring up because I'm going to use quotes for problem because they know what they're doing. It's just something they're doing in 5th. There is reprinting in the Monster Manual. If you're already going, oh, well, I have Deep Gnomes already, or, oh, I have Dwagar already. Well, remember, 5th edition has this rule of Player's Handbook +1. For player options, they've been using this kind of as an excuse to be able to reprint. Xanathar's, as much as I love it, some of the classes are straight ripped out of Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. It's the exact same class. Why? Well, you can only use Player's Handbook +1. So now you can use this other book and get the other stuff from that book and still have access to those things. I get it. It's a very smart business thing. GMs aren't limited to that. I get why the Demon Lords are in this book, and that's what it is. That's what this big spread is the Demon Lords. I get why, because maybe you want to do 9 Hells and the Abyss and all of that and the Blood War, and you don't want to go out and buy Out of the Abyss. Cool, I get it. Out of the Abyss is marketed as an adventure module. Really, Out of the Abyss is the Underdark book in a lot of ways that happens to also have an adventure, like a campaign in it. But fine, I get it on the sense of you don't feel like you need to buy every single book. Mordenkainen discusses the Blood War, so the Demon Lords being there makes sense. However, that's not a page or two. That's a fairly big spread. It's every single Demon Lord copied right out of the Abyss. The exact same artwork, just boom. That's kind of like if you went, we're going to give you the Book of Dragons, and it's going to have all new dragons in it. And they will have new dragons in it, but they'll also reprint all the dragons from the Monster Manual. It's kind of like that. And you're like, well, this is kind of filler. I very much feel like Mordenkainen's came up a bit short, because while the art is gorgeous, there are multiple dual page, just splash pages of art. Gorgeous. Amazing, especially if it were like a coffee table book. But really, that's to fill pages because they didn't have more monsters to hit the page count they wanted. Because it's like in the middle of the monster section, there's a full splash page. It's not dividing chapters or anything like that. So you got that. I always feel like I need to bring up when they're reprinting, because there's still cool, interesting things, but I definitely get if you drop the cash for Out of the Abyss and you go and buy Mordenkainen's and you flip them that Monster Man and you're like, this is stuff I already paid for. Again, it exists. Between that, I don't want to say this book is small, but it's about on the same size as Xanathar's Guide. So it's not a very thick book. When you're talking the $30 price tag, I felt Xanathar's Guide was actually a fairly small book for the price tag, but what was in it was super useful stuff. There were a couple sections in that book that I think were worth price of admission alone. Nothing in Mordenkainen's felt like it was worth the 30 or more price tag. I tend to put it at about 30 because that's Amazon. However, let's be honest, friendly local game shops, you're probably looking at 50, maybe 60. Not it, if you're talking about the alternate cover. I've seen shops sell it as much as $100 for the alternate cover. It's not worth it. I feel like this is a $20, maybe a $25 book. If you're specifically looking to do a game around the Blood War, I could see this being more. But also, for covering the Blood War, and demons and devils, they go into a lot about the demons and devils, because those are the foes, but they don't actually cover a lot of the region of the Nine Hells, or the region of the Abyss in enough detail for me to even say this is a good book, like this is the go-to book to prep for that. It feels kind of disjointed. It feels a little spread out, which, to be fair, is Mordenkainen. He goes all over and he's about balance, so it shouldn't be one or the other. That's fine, but honestly, I don't like giving star ratings at all. I would give this a meh out of 10, like realistically. If you enjoy it, if you want a lore book, I say go for it. If you want a book to read, like, I want the lore of the races of D&D. I want the lore of the Blood War. This is a great book for you. If you want this as a book that you're going to reference every other game as a DM, not really. If you want this as a book as a player to go, well, I'm a player. I want to get these books because I want to have all my options. I don't think the amount of options you get here are worth it, especially since a lot of the options are available elsewhere. So I honestly, it's one of those, I like the book. I want to say better things about the book, but when you break it down and you look at it, that's about as much as I can say about it. Anyways, I'll catch you guys next time. Bye. If you like that video, check out another video over here. Whatever it is, it's probably pretty good. Don't forget to like, share so other people can find the channel, and subscribe right up there. YouTube now won't let me put a link to the Patreon, but there is a link down in the description below. So if you want to help support the channel, check that out, and I will catch you guys next time.